Melbourne is not one property market right now, and these 9 suburbs are already showing the kind of value contraction that usually gets ignored until it is too late. Some of these suburbs have already wiped tens of thousands of dollars off family balance sheets, and the final 2 on this list are where the pressure is most dangerous. Stay with me, because I'm going to name all 9 suburbs, explain exactly why they are vulnerable, and show you the safer areas that are still holding up better than the rest. Toorak is already the shocker nobody expected. Recent reporting showed Melbourne's premium market softening, with the upper quartile falling roughly 1.9%, which wiped tens of thousands of dollars from median values. That is a brutal hit for a suburb that most Australians would assume is untouchable. The trigger here is simple: ultra-high purchase prices and rate sensitivity. When buyers are borrowing into the millions, even small rate changes crush serviceability and force vendors to cut hard. So why does this matter? Because when a prestige suburb starts cooling, it tells you the market is not just soft at the bottom, it is fragile at the top too. And if Toorak can soften, the next suburb is even more uncomfortable, because it is a unit market where the downside can move much faster. Docklands is next, and the numbers are already ugly. PropTrack modeling published by realestate.com.au showed Docklands facing extended weakness, with values slipping over the past few years, and Domain later reported values still softening across Melbourne's Bayside and inner apartment markets. The specific trigger here is oversupply of high-density investor stock. Too many similar apartments, too many off-the-plan purchases, and not enough owner-occupier depth to support prices when confidence drops. That is why Docklands has such a weak floor. If one more wave of distressed listings hits, the discounting usually feeds on itself. And if Docklands looks bad, the next suburb is a regional surprise that many buyers wrongly assumed would stay safe forever. Mooroopna already shows how fast the regional story can turn. The suburb sits inside the broader regional Victoria group that dominated the softer markets in recent PropTrack data, where several towns posted noticeable corrections after the pandemic boom. The trigger is the same pattern we keep seeing: pandemic-era buying at inflated prices, followed by a return to normal demand that simply cannot support the boom pricing anymore. On the surface, regional affordability looks safer. Underneath, the debt was still set at peak enthusiasm. Once buyers pull back, these towns can hollow out fast. And if that feels bad, the next suburb is in a city people still call bulletproof, which is exactly why it is so dangerous. South Perth units are already an interesting case. While the broader Perth housing market has been booming, high-density apartment pockets have historically faced valuation shortfalls. The trigger here is high-rise oversupply. A lot of the units were sold on the promise of easy living and strong yields, but when too many similar apartments hit the same buyer pool, resale values get squeezed. That is the trap. A city can look strong on the outside, while specific off-the-plan postcodes are bleeding on the inside. And if you think that is bad, the next suburb is a Melbourne outer ring market where the debt stress is starting to show everywhere. Cranbourne is already one of the clearest mortgage pressure suburbs in Melbourne. Standard & Poor's data, reported by realestate.com.au, showed 1.74% of loans in arrears there, and that is a serious warning sign in a suburb full of recent high-leverage buyers. The trigger is peak price borrowing in a household budget that is now getting crushed by repayments, transport costs, groceries, and school expenses. These outer ring suburbs do not need a dramatic crash to cause pain. They just need another quarter of weak sentiment and flat wages. Then the seller discounting begins, and if Cranbourne is under pressure, the next suburb is another Outer East postcode where the same stress pattern is already showing up. Pakenham is already carrying the same kind of strain. Realestate.com.au Victorian mortgage stress reporting placed it at 1.74% of loans in arrears, right alongside Cranbourne. The trigger here is high loan-to-value ratio buying during the 2021 to 2023 peak, when a lot of families assumed rates would come down fast and house prices would keep climbing. That did not happen. Now those households are sitting on thinner equity, weaker borrowing power, and less room to absorb even small shocks. One more rate rise, or one more period of weak buyer demand, and the downside gets sharper. And if Pakenham is already this exposed, the next suburb looks worse because it is carrying even more family debt relative to income. Point Cook is already in the danger zone. Realestate.com.au reported 2.19% of loans in arrears there, which is significantly higher than several neighbouring suburbs. The trigger is simple. Family households with large mortgages and very little spare cash left after repayments. When a suburb is loaded with owner-occupiers who bought at the top and have no yield buffer, the pressure shows up fast. That means sellers start asking too much, buyers start walking away, and the gap between asking prices and actual market clearing prices widens. Then values get wiped. And the next suburb is where the pattern stops looking like a local problem and starts looking like a citywide one. Cotality's May 7th, 2026 report confirmed Sydney has already fallen for 5 consecutive months and is 1.0% below its November 2025 peak, while Melbourne is 2.3% below its March 2022 peak. ANZ Research is forecasting Sydney at negative 0.7% and Melbourne at negative 1.7% for full year 2026. That matters because buyers who used the government's 5% deposit scheme are now the most exposed to negative equity risk if prices keep softening. The suburbs most exposed are the ones where all 3 conditions are colliding at once, and the final 4 on this list are ground zero. Werribee is already one of the clearest examples of a suburb under mortgage pressure. Victorian mortgage stress reporting has repeatedly shown Western Melbourne suburbs sitting under strain as repayments eat deeper into household budgets. The trigger is the classic outer ring equation. High purchase prices relative to local incomes, long commutes, and a borrower base that went in with very little room to move. When resale demand weakens in a suburb like Werribee, it does not take a huge fall to hurt people badly. It just takes enough sellers to meet a smaller pool of buyers. And if Werribee is already this tight, the next suburb is another West Melbourne pressure point with the same warning signs. Melton is already showing why those western corridors are so fragile. Mortgage stress data published across Victorian suburb reports has repeatedly highlighted the West as one of the most exposed parts of the state. The trigger is oversized debt on newer estates, where buyers paid peak prices for homes that still need long commutes, still need infrastructure catch-up, and still depend on confidence staying strong. The problem is that confidence is exactly what disappears first when rates stay high. That is how suburbs that looked affordable become price traps. And if Melton feels risky, the next suburb is the one that really concentrates the pain in one postcode. Narre Warren is already one of the most alarming names on the board. Standard & Poor's data reported by realestate.com.au showed postcode 3805 at 2.79% of loans in arrears, which made it the worst postcode in the country in that dataset. Another widely circulated 2025 analysis also put 94.4% of Narre Warren households in mortgage stress, which is an extraordinary level of strain by any measure. The trigger is concentration. Too many buyers entered late, too leveraged, and too dependent on rates falling quickly. That is when the market becomes fragile enough that one more weak quarter can set off a wave of forced selling. And the last suburb is where the pressure becomes hardest to ignore. Berwick is already under real strain too. A 2025 analysis reported nearly 100% of measured Berwick households experiencing some form of cash flow stress, which is why this suburb deserves serious attention even though it still carries a strong reputation. The trigger is straightforward. A large share of households bought at peak prices with high leverage and are now carrying repayments that have outrun their cash flow. This is the kind of suburb where people think they are safe because the streets look nice and the schools are strong. But if the mortgage math breaks, the appearance of safety does not save the balance sheet. And that is where the real danger lives. Here is the part every viewer is now asking. If your suburb has rising mortgage stress, you need to check 3 things immediately. First, whether stress is sitting above 35% of gross income for a meaningful share of borrowers, because that is where the pressure starts to become unstable. Second, whether days on market are sitting above 60 days for sale listings. That tells you buyers are hesitating and sellers are losing power. Third, whether auction clearance rates are staying below 55% for 3 straight weekends. That is usually where pricing starts to reset lower. Should you sell before it gets worse? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. If you own in a structural collapse suburb, the kind with high leverage, weak local incomes and no meaningful growth engine, cutting losses early can be the rational move. That is the category places like Narre Warren and parts of the Outer West are drifting toward if stress keeps building. But if you own in a cyclical prestige market that has been oversold because of rates, the right move may be patience. A place like Toorak can be hit hard without being permanently broken. The difference is simple. Structural weakness keeps compounding. Cyclical weakness can recover when rates and sentiment turn. Where should you buy instead? Look for suburbs with strong owner-occupier depth, tighter supply, and more resilience when rates are high. Norwood in South Australia is a strong example, with just 21 days on market for houses and strong buyer competition. Chermside in Brisbane has the benefit of a tight rental market and infrastructure support, with Brisbane vacancy still at 0.8%. Manly in Sydney remains land-constrained and owner-occupier heavy, which is exactly the kind of base that protects prices when credit tightens. And Fremantle in Western Australia has more balanced demand, with homes still moving in 52 days on market, rather than sitting for months. Every Australian family that got trapped in a falling market over the last 30 years had one thing in common. They did not see it coming because nobody showed them the data before it was too late. You are seeing the data now. What you do with it is entirely up to you. Tell me below, which suburb surprised you the most on this list? And if your suburb is not here, drop your postcode and I will tell you exactly what the mortgage stress data says about your area. Disclaimer: this video presents analysis based on publicly available market data and trends as of mid-2026. Property markets are highly volatile and past performance does not guarantee future results. The information provided is for educational and entertainment purposes only. All investment decisions should be made with professional financial advice. We are not licensed financial advisors. Always do your own research before making any real estate decisions.